Okay, well, I guess I just gonna make this really short. I have a few slides here that I'm gonna put on a video, and they're gonna be in alphabetical order. So let's look at them in alphabetical order because I'm really don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Um, so basically, I finished the demo for the SXR 250 yesterday, and I mean, I'm gonna just say this without any real qualifications or long explanations or science or anything like that. There are three things that happen. Okay, and I'll get to them in order here. Let's look at this in alpha freaking betical order. Okay, so the first thing that pops up on my list is the Sport Rider dyno chart for the SV650. And this is 2006, a little bit older than the current bike. Might make a little bit more, a little bit less power, but it's pretty close. So as you can see there, these that's the Ninja 650R, which is the vertical twin Ninja, the Honda 599. I don't even know what the hell that is. The FC6, which is the inline 4 bike, that's 600cc, 90.4 horsepower at the rear wheel at 12,000 RPM. And there's two things I want to point out here. First of all, is you see that the slope of the line is pretty much the same for all of these bikes, below 8K. Then what happens is they drop off, they roll off, and that is because the horsepower is equal to the torque times the RPM times a conversion factor, which is a constant. Okay, so when you see the horsepower roll off like that, that means that the torque is rolling off like that. And when the torque rolls off and like that, the bike tends not to want to rev past the point where it starts to roll off. It just really kind of starts making a lot of noise, a lot of screaming, a lot of complaining, but it doesn't actually start. It doesn't really want to rev more, although it will because of the acceleration before that point. So it'll basically coast up into that higher RPM band. And as you can see, the red line is somewhere over past the right side of that curve. Like for the green for the Ninja 650R, the red line might be about 11K, maybe 12K. So now when we start talking about red lines, I want you to keep that in mind, that the red line is almost always going to be off the right side of the dyno chart. Okay, but the peak horsepower is going to be at or below the red line. So here you can see the red line for the SV650 might be 11K maybe, but the peak power is down here around 9K. And it's coasting, when you accelerate, it coasts up past the peak point to the RPM red line. Second thing you want to notice is that the SV650 makes more power at 8,500 RPM than any of the other bikes. In this case, the FC6 or the Ninja 650 or the Honda 599, whatever the hell that is. Okay, it's probably some kind of vertical twin, but I don't know anything about it. So all the other bikes are making less power at that RPM. So under 6,000 RPM, it is, if not the best performing engine, it is close to the best performing engine. Now what happens between 8,000 and 12,000 RPM is that the motors spin up at a higher RPM, therefore magnifying the torque more, and that's where you see the extra power come from. So if you look at the fact that it's 90 horsepower at 12,000 RPM, and you divide that 12,000 out, and then you multiply it by 8,000, you see that it's 70 horsepower. The torque is about the same, and the torque is really the same. You know it's the same because the slope is about the same for all of these bikes, and the magnitude where they're in the same where you have the plots are the same is about the same. And you can see that because the Suzuki at the top, it's making more torque at the same RPM than the other engines. So even though the bikes like the blue here and the red ones, which are the Honda and the Kawasaki, might make more peak power, they're not making the same torque. They're making less torque. It's just that they're revving higher, and that's where they're making horsepower. Horsepower only matters when it comes to top speed. It does not matter when it comes to acceleration. What you need here when it comes to acceleration at a speed that's below the peak speed that you need for a certain amount of horsepower, okay, say it's 60 miles an hour, okay, where all of these bikes can easily do 60 miles an hour. Even the Suzuki GSX-R 250 can easily do 60 miles an hour. We don't care about the peak power so much. What we care about is the torque. And you can see the torque here is the most for the SV650, and it rolls off at about 8,000 RPM. So remember that number, 8,000 RPM. Okay, let's go to the next chart. We spent 6 minutes talking about this chart already. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so there you can see the torque curve for the SV650. It is fairly flat, with a couple of bumps in here, but we generally call this flat up to, as you see here, 8,500 RPM, and it drops off. And as I said before, that is where that roll off comes in the horsepower curve, is where the torque rolls off at about 8,500 RPM. Okay, next curve we see here is a curve I just made, which is a plot of the 0 to 60 acceleration characteristics for constant acceleration using your basic physics calculations. V equals AT, S equals 1/2 AT squared. We see that if we calculate the acceleration in this column over here that says feet per second squared, given a certain amount of seconds, 0 to 60, assuming constant acceleration, we get 88 feet per second squared, which is the peak speed 60 miles an hour at 88 feet per second divided by 1 second, and it down rates from there. Now, I have over on the left the 0 to 60 times for the SV650. You can see it's 3.3 seconds. You go to 3.3 seconds, between 3 and 3.5 seconds. That means that the average acceleration is about 27 foot per second squared, a little less than 1G at 32 feet per second, which would be at about 2.7 seconds, which is coincidentally achieved by a number of leader bikes and higher level bikes, between 3 and 2.5 seconds for 0 to 60 times. And we see that takes a distance of about 145 feet roughly to go 0 to 60, which coincidentally is the braking distance at 1G, about 130 feet for 1G braking of a motorcycle. Now we come down and we see on the right this curve that basically plots all this data. You can see the linear acceleration curve is a function of time. Constant slope indicates a constant acceleration. In this case, what we're looking at is V over T. Okay, so I don't know if that made sense, but let's ignore that. The basic point here is that if it takes me 10 seconds to accelerate to 60 miles per hour, I can look up here and see that it'll take me 250 feet. If it takes me 13, 14, 15 seconds, I can look over here and say it'll take 350 feet to 450 feet. If it takes me 3 seconds, down here at about 75 feet. Okay, the orange curve is showing me that as I increase the number of seconds, my peak or my average acceleration is decreasing, which is the right hand scale on the right, from 88 feet per second down to 10 feet per second at about 15 or 20 seconds. And I think that's columns. I honestly think that's columns, not seconds, because that seconds is over here on the right. So that plot is not quite right. That's going to be the plot in columns. And I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. Sorry. 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, roughly 20 rows. And that's what that is at the bottom, not seconds, it's rows. That's what happens when you do this too quickly. You kind of make a mess of it. Anyway, so moving on to another tape. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at here in the next chart is what? A comment from a guy who sent me a note telling me how I shouldn't assume that he can't ride because he's been riding a dirt bike or a KX500, whatever the hell that is, which would make me shit myself in all 4 gears. All 4 gears. Amazing. I would shit myself with this KX5. I think that's that is essentially the precursor, if I'm not mistaken, to the Ninja 650, the vertical twin 4-stroke, or I don't know, maybe it's a single thumper. I doubt it, but whatever. Anyway, I don't think I'm going to shit myself riding a 500, even if it's a 2-stroke in all 4 gears. Believe me, I don't. Even if the gearing is really short. But I shouldn't assume that he can't ride. But he can still assume that I can shit myself in all 4 gears. For anyone who wants to ride the legal limit, the R3 is plenty of bike. For those who have death wish, who live in a fantasy world like yourself, other bikes are more suitable. People around 225 pounds or more, I'd get something with more torque as well. But for most people, the R3 is a great bike. Okay, first of all, I want to say I weigh around 225 pounds. Okay. Second, I do not have a death wish. Far from it. And then third, I definitely don't live in a fantasy world. Fourth, you'll see a lot of this when it comes to talk about these 300cc bikes. A lot of generalities and a lot of assumptions about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. A lot of minimizations about what type of riding is being done. A lot of smoke and mirrors. Never any hard data, okay? Who wants to ride within the legal limit? Now, the legal limit, as we all know, can be anywhere from 25 miles an hour to 70, 75 miles an hour. And riding within the legal limit is one thing, okay? How quickly you get to the legal limit is a second concept. And passing somebody where you occasionally go over the legal limit is a third concept. Notice how he limits the whole discussion to riding within the legal limit, okay? I guarantee you that riding within the legal limit will mean that any bike which is legal is plenty of bike. If all you want to do is ride within the legal limit, you have all day, you have all the roads pretty much to yourself, there's no need to pass anybody, there's no need to climb up steep hills or anything like that, then yes, riding a bike that's legal to ride on the road is probably plenty of bike to ride. The problem is that quite often in the real world, we do have to accelerate rapidly to road speeds. We do have to accelerate beyond the legal limit to pass other bikes. And it certainly becomes an important factor that we talk about performance beyond the legal limit. All right, so he's already got me on the one thing. I'm adding around 225 pounds. Second thing is we're not talking about riding at the legal limits. We now need to talk about more power than the R3. It's that simple, as I said in the videos. So moving on. Okay, next video is, here we go. Guys, 200 pounds, sold my R3 a couple months ago. He sold it, but he's still talking about how it's fine for the highway. And again, for the highway, what does that mean for the highway? Does that mean riding on an empty highway at 55 miles an hour, an empty highway at 75 miles an hour, or a road that has traffic, a road that is a truck or something you're trying to pass, which is doing 40 miles an hour, and you're looking at oncoming traffic, which is doing 50, 60, 70 miles an hour? Are we talking about uphills? What? No, this guy is just using this generic term, highway, okay? Here's the problem with that generic term. It doesn't cover all the outlying cases where you do need to worry about performance. Hey, you don't get tossed around and it can speed just fine. Speeding, we know all about speeding. We're motorcycle riders. We know all about speeding. You want to tell me you don't get tossed around? You do get tossed around anytime you pass somebody who buffets you with their wind coming off the back of their vehicle or any crosswinds. You're going to get tossed around. You're not going to physically get thrown off the bike or tossed off the side of the highway, maybe, but you're certainly going to get buffeted. There's no question about it. That's a whole different problem. Let's leave buffeting aside, okay? I easily hit 90 to 100 with no problem. Let's assume that he's not talking about kilometers per hour, in which case 100 kilometers per hour is 60 miles per hour. Let's assume that he's talking actually about miles per hour. It's an assumption, but still, let's assume that. 90 to 100 miles per hour is about the top speed of an R3, okay? You don't easily hit the top speed of any vehicle. You don't just go to the top speed like it's no problem, okay? And if you want to go faster, there really isn't a need of a bigger bike. That's the whole point. Of course there is a need for a bigger bike because you want to go faster than you would go on an R3. It's not a question of going faster in terms of speed. It's a question of going faster in terms of acceleration. He ignores the issue by talking about top speed. You will hear a lot of people with these bikes talk about top speed as if top speed and only top speed matters. It's simply not the case. 9 times out of 10, what matters is acceleration. We rarely ride our bikes to the maximum speed that these bikes can handle. What we worry about 99.999% of the time is how quickly it gets to the speed we want to go or need to go, not how fast it can go. That is not the issue, okay? So forget all about this other stuff about getting a good enough bike to go to. Yes, of course it can ride anywhere. Yes, of course it can ride the speed limits and surpass them. Yes, of course it can do that. No one's saying it can't do that. That's not the issue, okay? Gets you up to speed fast enough to get on the highways. I'm sure that it's given enough time, you'll get fast enough to go on a highway. Hey, great. That's exactly what I want to know when I'm talking about buying a motorcycle to ride on highways with trucks and riding up and down hills. It does 80 to 85 easy. How easy does it do it? Not a mention of it, okay? Well, let's put it this way. One guy says it does 80 to 85 easy. The other guy says it does 90 to 100 easy. Someone is not being honest in just the two of them. But highways are usually 60 to 70 miles an hour. No, they're not usually 60 to 70 miles an hour. They're usually 60 to 80 miles an hour, occasionally 90 miles an hour. And again, it's not the top speed that matters so much, although that is a valid concern of not buying a bike that will do way more than the top speed, because it's not necessary to do way more than the top speed. It is still necessary to buy a bike that has enough power to do at the top speed, at the limit, I should say, or faster within a reasonable amount of time, because you do need to pass not just above the speed limit, but within a reasonable distance. It can't be just that it goes fast enough. It also has to go fast enough, quickly enough. That is the important thing to, as this guy says, ride a safe ride with a bike that has enough power. Okay? Next, move on. The last thing I want to do is commute on a slow bike. The last thing I want to do is get out there in rush hour traffic and commute on a bike that can't accelerate. Okay, next. I have this diagram here, and I drew this diagram basically of a situation I ran into, or that occurred to me while I was coming to the demo where I rode the 250 in a car. I was driving a nice four-door Chevy sedan. Nice engine. Actually, it's pretty decently quick car. And I had this scenario. I had to make a left turn across a divided highway with traffic coming from the right down a hill, and I could only see to the top of the hill, which was maybe 500 feet off to the right. I couldn't see above that. I could not know if there was a car coming beyond the crest, but I had to get out and make the turn. I could see to the left, no problem. That was downhill. So I pull the car out, I go into the center area in the divider, and I'm like literally just hoping I pull out of here and accelerate and nobody comes thundering over that hill and runs into me while I'm pulling out, okay? Sure enough, I pull into the right lane to accelerate, and a freaking truck comes down the hill like an F-250 towing a big trailer behind it, and I could already see that it was trying to slow down, and I was like, there's no way guy's gonna be able to slow that thing down coming down the hill. And he's doing about 65 miles an hour. So I am like accelerating the car, and I didn't want to get into the left lane because I didn't know if he was gonna pass me on the left, and I just tried to accelerate the car as fast as I could down the hill, okay? Well, this guy's coming up. I can see the thing kind of shaking back and forth a little bit while he's, trying to figure out what to do, or he's slowing the thing down or trying to. And thank God the car picked up enough speed without a problem. Okay, here's the math behind that situation. The car, not a bike, the car, okay, isn't going to be accelerating in 0 to 60 in less than 4 seconds. Okay? I would need a nice BMW 535 M1, something like that, to accelerate that car in 0 to 60 in less than 4 seconds. 4 seconds, it takes 175 miles an hour to accelerate. Constant acceleration. In that 4 seconds, that truck with that camper will do 355 feet. Okay? So it will do 2 feet for every foot it takes me to accelerate that car to the same speed. Okay? So that means that by the time I get 175 feet down the road, if the camper was 175 feet to the right, it would catch me by the time I'm doing 65 miles an hour. Okay? That is what is called close. Okay? That's very close. That means that he had to have slowed down that vehicle to avoid hitting me. Okay? Because there's no way that car got to 60 miles an hour in 4 seconds, even with the slight downhill. Okay? Now, remember the times that I gave you for the bikes. Okay? Ninja 300, 5.7 seconds or something like that. 5.1 seconds. Ninja 250, 6.9 seconds. SV650, 3.3 seconds. The SV650 would have accelerated almost safely coming from a dead stop in the middle of that divided highway. Okay? Almost safely. At full throttle. Through the first couple of gears to 60 miles an hour. There's no fucking way in hell you would have survived that situation on a Ninja 300. It wouldn't have happened. It would not have happened. You would either have been run over from behind, or you would have pulled out to the left and hoped the guy passed you on the right, or you would have hoped the guy pulled out to the left and passed you. You would basically have been passed by that truck going down that hill if you had been on a Ninja 300. An R3 is about the same performance as the Ninja 300, maybe ever so slightly faster, maybe a half second faster to 60 miles an hour, as I showed you, okay, in that drawing. The GSX-R 250 that I wrote in that demo would have been smushed in that situation. Now, this also assumes that it's not wet, okay? There's no way that the guy is going to be able to brake if it's wet. He's screwed if he tries, okay? It's not snowing, it's not wet, the road's not icy, not cold, nothing, there's no wind blowing into you. You're not carrying a passenger, you're not carrying any luggage. That's your best acceleration performance, is to get smushed by that truck, okay? So, obviously, at least the 650 would have been the bike that you wanted to buy and ride in that situation, okay? Let's move on. Crashing and turning while braking, okay? Problem B. What happens if you don't have enough space? Well, you need to slow the bike down while turning. It's that simple. You can read this. I left this in there. You can people can talk about the UK training and all this kind of stuff. I'll leave that in there. You can laugh about it. Look, you don't learn how to do it until you learn how to do it. And if you're going to crash, you're going to crash. Now, if you're going to learn how to do it in the UK, you learn how to do it on public roads and private parking lots, just like we learn how to do it in the United States. The only difference is that you don't get your license until you pass the test. That doesn't mean that you're not going to crash trying to get your license. Okay? The whole thing that's saying that you don't have these accidents on the road is bullshit, because you do have to do it on the road in front of the examiner before you get your license. Okay? And if you're going to crash, you're going to crash. Plus, it doesn't mean that you can't crash just because you have a freaking UK license. I read and I see people on YouTube crashing UK bikes, UK licenses all the fucking time. Okay? They think they can ride because they have a license. They think they're hot shit. They go out there and they crash. That's simple. What was this other thing here? Okay, so now we get to the fun part. This is gearingcommander.com data. I'm talking about the road speed versus RPM in each gear. As you can see, the green is first gear, second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear, sixth gear for a Hayabusa GSX-R 1300. First gear, at redline, with the true redline is actually maybe the next notch over from the blue line. Okay. First gear redline is going to be maybe 80 miles an hour. Okay. That means that bike can ride to 80 miles an hour in first gear without shifting. The big problem this bike has in full throttle acceleration is the back spinning, the wheel spinning, and limiting the acceleration rate. If you roll on the throttle on this thing, instead of slamming that thing wide open, it will accelerate nicely and it will hit 80 miles an hour, okay, in about 4 seconds, maybe 3 seconds. It's going to hit 60 miles an hour in 2.8 seconds. It'll get to 80 miles an hour, maybe 3.5 seconds, okay? 3.5 seconds. Now, if you're pulling out in front of somebody doing 80 instead of 60, 80, okay, they're going to need, again, about 400 to 450 feet, maybe 500 feet to catch you, okay, at 80 miles an hour. But your bike only needs 4 seconds to do 80, so you'll have no problem getting away from them. If you have 500 feet of clearance to work with, meaning that you need to be able to see them off to your right 500 feet, and you need to be able to see 500 feet to your left at full throttle, okay? You do not even want to think about trying to make such a pass or pull out on a Ninja 300. It would be ludicrous. You would need thousands of feet to make that pass. I just showed you. You don't believe me? Go back and look at the chart, okay? Now, what else? Here's the Suzuki 250, okay? As you can see, in first gear, it's doing a blistering 30 miles an hour at redline, 50 miles an hour in second gear, 60 in third gear, 65, 67 in fourth. It doesn't get to 80 until you get to sixth fucking gear. How long do you think it would take this bike to get to 80 miles an hour? How long? How long? Probably 20 seconds to get to 80. And that's exactly what happened to me when I rode it on this demo. Every time we stopped and started up from a dead stop, the rest of the bikes left it. They just left it. And it took, I kid you not, almost a minute for me to catch them. At one point, I think the chase rider had to tell them to slow down so I could catch up to them. Okay? It's not that I could have caught them. I certainly could have caught that kind of storage. I ran out of storage. You don't have that kind of time and distance to make these giant long passes on bikes on the highway when cars are coming at you the other way. You need to make these passes ultra quickly pronto, very quickly. Even if the thing's going the same way that you are, it's still, when you get to highway speeds, it's going to take you, like a quarter mile to make a pass on an R3. It's ridiculous. Let's move on quickly here. I need to get this built here. Suzuki SB 650. All right, first gear 42 miles an hour, second gear 59, third gear 76. Okay, fourth gear 93. I see. I can easily get this bike to 80 miles an hour in fourth gear. I had no problem getting it to 60 miles an hour in second gear red line. The bike wasn't all that quick, all that fast, but it was certainly fast enough for backroads riding in the middle of Virginia, and it certainly was way faster than the 250. It was just ridiculous, the difference in performance between the two bikes. Not even close. Not even freaking close. That was a $8,000 bike versus a $5,000 bike. I have absolutely no doubt which I would buy. No question. No question about it. Now, let's move on here a little bit more. Okay. Oh, look at, we have an R3. Oh, R3, back down. 80 miles an hour in fourth gear, right? So it has the capability to do 80 miles an hour in fourth gear, but look at the red line you're pulling on this bike to do that. You're pulling 11,000 RPM, at which point the bike only makes 35 horsepower. Okay, I think it could do it gear-wise. What I don't know is if it could do it power-wise, if you think that bike can really do 106 miles per hour, you're out of your mind. The Ninja 300's top speed is well known to be about 101 miles per hour. If the R6 can do even 2 miles an hour faster, I would be amazed. Not 4 or 5 miles an hour. I think it could probably do 85 miles an hour. I think it could do at least as fast as the Ninja 300, but I don't think it can do over 100 miles an hour. And I don't think at 80 miles an hour, I want to ride a bike that has a 20 mile per hour speed cushion if I'm out there dealing with traffic and climbing up and down hills. I think it's simply ludicrous to ride that bike in any kind of real traffic. However, I just qualified it myself. In any kind of real traffic is one thing. On a road with virtually no traffic, hey, whole different story. On a flat road, whole different story. As long as you're not trying to stay up with faster bikes, whole different story. As long as you're not weighing down the bike with a lot of gear, or you're not a big, heavy person yourself, an entirely different story. If you weigh 150, 175 pounds, you're riding that bike on a flat surface, you're not carrying a lot of stuff, you're not going to winds, you're not trying to pass fast traffic, you're not trying to make a quick pass between oncoming traffic, yes, then it would probably be fine. It'll get you where you're going, and it won't cost you a lot of money. But I wouldn't ever compare it to an R6 even, or an SV650, or any kind of decent 600 or whatever in terms of real world performance, because the bike simply does not have it. It is only capable of the speeds. If anything, it is in no way, shape, or form capable of the acceleration or of the same kind of riding style that you would see with even a 650. I do not want to hear any more bullshit about that bike ever again. It's just enough. Done. Okay? But I guarantee you, you will hear a lot of bullshit from people who own that bike, who used to own it and stopped riding, or who, worst of all, want to buy a bike and can't afford anything faster. Okay? And that's all there is to it. I don't have any sympathy for people who can't afford a decent motorcycle. If you think buying a slow-ass bike makes sense, you are an idiot. First class fucking fool. Those things will get you fucking killed. And if you don't believe me, go on YouTube and you can look at the reams of videos of people who have crashed those things to show you that it doesn't matter if it has no power. It's still a motorcycle and you can still wreck it. Doesn't matter if it can do 80 miles an hour. You cannot make passes on a bike that has no power. And it doesn't matter if it's cheap. Your insurance company is still going to screw you because it is a motorcycle. Beyond that, I can't stop you from doing anything stupid. That's how it is.